From Down Below, Live 80 Meters Deep is the latest live album of the legendary dark metal band Moonspell. It is a truly unforgettable adventure, recorded live at the Grutas de Mira Aire. I'm certainly mispronouncing that, one of Portugal's 7 natural wonders. It is such an incredible venue that you really need to see it to believe it. Fernando Ribeiro is the singer and founder of Moonspell, and he joins me today. Before we talk about Moonspell itself and, of course, this incredible live product, I am curious about you as a musician, because you're a dad and you went through the lockdown and all the complications associated with them. On the one hand, you're the breadwinner, you're touring, puts food on the table, and on the other, you're a dad who sometimes has to treasure the time to spend with their kids. So how was this period for you where you couldn't do all of these things that you normally do and that you like to do, such as performing in front of this audience that truly, truly loves you, while at the same time being confined to an extent to your home?
Well, I think we're all still picking up the pieces, picking up the crumb breads to see where it leads. You know, a lot of people have a lot of opinions about COVID, but I believe that only in a matter of few years we'll have a better notion, better knowledge about how it affected us, our lifestyle, our convictions, our freedom, our health. So it's still time to, lick the wounds and try to put up a good face and went on. But on the contrary of many musicians I have read and listened to, I didn't welcome COVID as a break. I think COVID was a calamity. So a lot of people died. It's I think it made stronger, the disconnecting about people, which we talk about hermitage. I think people are full of hate these days and not full of hope, as I expected, and many people expected about the transition to a post-COVID. But on the other hand, I'm the kind of person that it's committed to what I do, whatever I do, being a dad, being a musician, etc. And it's our job to find time to do everything, to say yes when the time is to say yes, to say no when the time is to say no. So I think the COVID was a pretty useless thing in our lives, and it wasn't created or developed or whatever theory people got now in order to give musicians a break from the hard work. So as far as Moonspell went, it was a big challenge, obviously. Some good things born out of that challenge, like the From Down Below live 80 Meters Deep, the new live album DVD that we're going to release soon. And there was a lot of bad things, like financial struggle, playing COVID shows to mask people on a chair. So I'll remember this as the worst time of my life, to be honest, because I have a kid. He's 10 years old. I love my kid as much as I love, as much as any other dad loves his or her sprawl. But on the other hand, if I had to choose, I'll prefer to keep going and deal with it like as we go. But also, as far as Moonspell goes, yeah, we kind of struggle. We kind of won some, lost some. And right now we're trying to find our way back into the fans, into the lifestyle, into something a bit more normal than these 2 past years of hell.
So you told me that you did a couple of shows where you were doing it with the audience completely masked.
Yeah, not a couple, actually a lot, because first we had to put bread on the table. Secondly, we were trying not to fall off the radar of the fans. And also a lot of people criticized us online, and the fans, how can you watch a metal show with a mask? And I agree. But on the other hand, it was also a show that people wanted to support us. It was also a love thing for Moonspell. It wasn't pleasant for anyone, but it was our way to get close to the fans. And also being smart, because we, for instance, last year, there was still a heavy confinement in Portugal, and we played a Halloween show that we do every year in Portugal or elsewhere. And there was like 2,000 people attending, and there was this big, chaos about wearing masks or not. So the kind of people left it, the government and the health authorities left it up for people here in Portugal. And I was very glad nobody was wearing a mask because it was a moment of freedom, and there was no outcome, no outbreak of COVID back in that city we played. So yeah, it was a struggle for everyone, but the only way to struggle is to be in the battlefield and not at home, saying, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm with my family." I'm always glad to be with my family, but I'm glad to be with the fans. It's not a choice. It's something I do for many years, and my family knows that.
Certainly, and I think that it also connects with simply the idea of making a balancing of risks and rewards. I remember that I had the opportunity to see a black metal show with Marduk and 1349, if I'm not mistaken, and
Right.
everybody was supposed to be sitting down, and it was just a bizarre experience. But when they're doing the encore, people said like "fuck it," and they just rushed the stage, and I was photographing it, but there is such a sense of freedom that these kids get from just being like, you know what, we have been trapped for so long that this is also our healthcare. It is not just about not being sick. It is also about being able to enjoy the things that make life worth living.
I totally agree. I've been in a few shows myself, and whenever I couldn't wear a mask or whenever I could stand up, even by instinct, I would. Like I said previously, not that I'm denying on everything. Today, when you are a musician and you speak publicly, you have to be really extra careful because some people will say you're X or Y or whatever, but I'm too old to care anyway. And but the thing is that I completely agree. I think the COVID did its damage, but its long-term damage will be mental for sure. So it happened the same on some Moonspell shows where people, when we played like Alma Mater, which is a very, driving song, people could not be sitting down, and they just disrespected the rules. Sometimes the security was there kicking out people, but we need that too. Otherwise, we'll be robots if we are not already. And I think living is a bit more than surviving and not getting sick. Because, like I said to many people, well, we all have to die, don't we? So why not live a little?
Absolutely. I mean, there is an issue, of course, of responsibility. Yes, we're all going to die. That doesn't mean that you should be smoking, 10 packs of cigarettes every day. But if you're looking at a situation of a certain amount of risk versus a reward of just making life worth living, fuck it. You have to take that risk. It is very difficult to just say, protect yourself and stay in a bubble forever, without denying, of course, the existence of COVID and the risk that it represents to people.
Yeah, but for instance, here in Portugal, all the communication from on behalf of the government and the health authorities, whenever there was, more numbers and whatever, it was the trick here, the tool here was always to blame people. I don't know what happened in your country, but here, on top of everything that we were struggling with, and that people in places of making right decisions and decisions that affect thousands of people were, like, for instance, Boris Johnson was partying when everybody was at home, and there's many examples like this big gap between do as I say, don't do as I do, and I was always rebelled against it. It's not our fault. We don't have the means. I mean, actually, one thing I thought about is that when they confined all the music business here in Portugal, I think that they should have come to us, to musicians, to agents, to festival promoters, because if they are one working class that it's used to work with crowds and to control them and to talk with them, it's definitely the music business and the industry of entertainment. But it seems that our so-called leaders were concerned about taking the easy path. Yeah.
So as to move a little bit away from the issue of COVID for a bit, you are the only surviving member, so to speak, of Moonspell, in the sense that you're the only one who has been there since the very, very beginning of the band. And since you were in that role, I would like you to, if possible, take me back to what I believe were the early or mid 90s And tell me what your goals were. What were you trying to make with this band? What was the niche that you were trying to fill?
Well, it's survival of the fittest. No, I think that if there are stuff, of course, things evolve and happen, and it's not the only band. Nowadays, it's more common for bands even not to have any original members, and we have a stable lineup since at least '95, half of the band. But for me, on the 30 years, what I most regret is always people that have to leave the band. I think that's everybody failing each other, not only people who left the band, but the people who stayed. So it's always hard for me to process this, and also because, unfortunately, on the contrary of other bands, I rarely stayed friends with people with ex-members of Moonspell, which for me is a big shame, and I would like to make peace with everyone, but it takes two to tango. But going back to the beginning, well, we started off not as musicians. We started off as metal journalists. We had a fanzine back then, 89, I think, 90, called Darkness Sin. It was very hard to print such an ambitious fanzine in Portugal. But we had interviews with Sarcófago, Paradise Lost, when they were making the first album out of the demos, with Battery, that we met Quarton in 1990 here in Portugal. So we decided to interview him without any agenda. There wasn't the schedule, but just went out on the street and did a bunch of questions, and it was kind enough. And many bands. And suddenly we realized, when we looked to the Portuguese scene, that we were getting black and death metal with gothic influences, extreme stuff from everywhere except for Portugal. And Portugal was still very classic-minded, where people wanted to be the Portuguese Iron Maiden, the Portuguese Metallica, the Portuguese Slayer. And we were exposed to so much originality, bands from Singapore, bands from Brazil, bands from Holland, bands from the Netherlands now, bands from everywhere, that I was like, together with the other former members, well, there's only one way that we can, trade tapes and send them something dark and occult from Portugal, which is to form our own band. And that was our main motivation, to have a band from Portugal, at the time named Morbid God, and then we evolved to Moonspell, that could have a sound that we would write about on the fanzine. And then the band stuck, the fanzine not really, and that's what we wanted to do. But it was tough learning because nobody was talented to play instruments. There was 33 years crossing the desert until we made finally into a double compilation album here in Portugal on vinyl called The Birth of a Tragedy, with promising and established metal bands. And yeah, we were very, very different. And that kind of, everybody said, well, it's not going to work. But it did work because of that difference and that motivation of sending tapes with Morbid God and Moonspell, so that people could see that Portugal was also in that kind of underground map, and not only trying to be the Metallica of the south of Europe.
And when you were working in this magazine, did you only do reviews, or did you like to write articles about the scene that you were looking at?
Well, basically, metal journalism evolved a lot. Basically, we did interviews, yeah, and we had people everywhere in the world that were sending contributions, because there was no internet, there was no Skype, so everything had to be based in the primitive form of letters, etc. And obviously, also to get some free stuff and demos, we contacted everyone. We got a shitload of reviews, but everything was very personal in a way. There was not an article about the scene. We're just excited to get stuff. We had thrash metal from the US. We had Finnish doom. We had Brazilian death metal. We had American death metal. So we didn't feel special enough, even though it was personalized, for people to know our opinion. So all our reviews were outstanding. We were so excited about it, that we liked everything. And probably we had no criteria. But back then it was just exciting times. And we felt that our mission, much more than to convey our opinion about stuff or about the scene or about what was happening in Norway with the black metal, was really to expose it and to share the good news that there was kind of really great music for those exciting times. Yeah, we were more focused on that.
It is such a gigantic difference, right? Because now that the demand of the press, and because every guy with a computer has a magazine or something, so that it is the secrecy to an extent and the mystery of being an artist has largely disappeared, right? Because everything can be asked, and so many artists also make themselves completely open
Yeah.
through social media and stuff like that.
I think I have to unfortunately agree. Yeah, it's not the same when we looked up to Bathory or Venom and we had no idea of what those people were. And normally then we met them and they were quite more normal than what we thought. But all this anticipation, all this mysticism is definitely gone. I mean, for me, social networking, etc., could have been a great opportunity, but we just spoiled it, in the name of hate and opinion, etc. So it's hard for me to be there, but I have it. Of course, I need to promote my work. I'm also a professional musician, but more than half of our career was lived without social networking. So we know that nowadays we can't do that, but we know the other reality. That's the good thing about Moonspell in these 30 years, is that we caught the last, let's say, analogic period and stepped into the digital, but not head first. I'm not the kind of person that is always on the exposing and telling people what to do. And, I have my causes, but they are private, they are not public. So I try to balance this. But of course, it's a shame. But I think there's two sides of it. Otherwise, people just stupidly worship you, like without any kind of criteria. There's a lot of this kind of stuff, like you're my god and you're the wolf and you're whatever, that is quite the exaggeration. But some people that are a bit more old school and have seen the bands without the filter of social media, they still keep these memories and this legacy and this mysticism around. So I'm a nice guy, I'm a sociable person, but also, and I'm a people's man, but also I don't like to exaggerate it. I think everything has to be authentic. So I had already sent fans home because they were just crossing the line, and I have invited them, I wouldn't say to my place, but to dinner and made friends. So I think it's really up to you. What kind of career do you want to have? And for me, the focus is on music, on lyrics, on being well on stage, and play nice shows and perform with heart and passion, and then all the rest, which is a lot that the bands have to do. It's kind of a consequence of that cause, of that core that Moonspell works around. And about the overwhelming like schedule of a band, it also has to do not only with the interviews, but with the fact that Moonspell is self-managed. So we do everything ourselves, from ordering merch to buy the flight tickets. And sometimes it's not romantic, but it's the way that we are and the way that we chose for our bands. And sometimes we're making these we're making these two big shows at the Lisbon and Porto Coliseum here for the 30 years of Moonspell in Portugal. So I was in a production meeting. Normally, you don't see the singers there. They're just at home, watching Netflix and flirting with girls on Instagram. But I'm different on that aspect because Moonspell does everything by themselves. So sometimes it's hard to make time. And also it was the first week of of my kid on school, which is always an experience. To say the least. But I always find time. Obviously, I work since morning until late hours, but I'm saving my energy and my books to my retirement, which will happen eventually. I don't know in how many years, but right now, especially with the crisis and the competition, you have to double down your efforts and you have to work hard, even if it's the half of the result you have. I think I know no other reality than Moonspell, than hard work, really, and dedication and time consuming. I was in my 4-day vacations with my family, and I was in touch with the US agent because we couldn't find a tour bus, and then we found transportation, but we couldn't find a driver, and I had to manage all those stuff while my kid was swimming in the pool and calling my name. But that's just the game. Yeah, that's the way it is. And as long as I'm playing it, I'm okay with the rules. Yeah.
Since you mentioned that you have your kids in school, is he young enough to that the classmates don't know who you are, or is he kind of on a level where people know that his dad is like a rock star?
Fortunately, nobody. I mean, this is a small town, so a lot of people know me, of course. And Portugal is also a small country, and Moonspell has been around for ages and charting #1, etc. But it really depends if you behave like a rock star to be seen like one. And not here in my town. No, I'm just another dad that goes there, early in the morning, drops the kid, and picks him up. And I try to have a low profile. I also write in the local newspaper, etc. So people know me, but that doesn't affect my kids' state of mind, and my kids also right to be anonymous, because my wife, she's also a singer, and she's very big here in Portugal. She was on X Factor and everything, so everybody kind of knows us, but it's not a big deal, really. And also, yeah, and also when it comes to the music that my kid and the other kids listen to, man, you'll be surprised. It's more rap and Brazilian funk. But this year that we could get more out, I took my kid to a couple of shows. He's still coming to some other shows. I took him to see a classic string quartet, violins and viola, here at the Classical Music Festival. They were from South Korea, 4 girls, amazing repertoire. We went to see Iron Maiden together, which he enjoyed very much because it was like a family gig and everything was very old school with the monsters and the Icarus not being a 3D thing, but really a thing, like a prop. And we also went to a friend of mine gig, and he's one of the, if not the biggest hip hop star here in Portugal, but not this kind of gangster, more like, but they listen to everything. I mean, kids surprise you all the time. I had once a party here for my kids, and I had to, because of the rules, I had to just invite a couple of kids. And we were here where I am now in my office. I connected like just the studio so they could make some music and some beats or whatever they wanted to. So I picked up one of my tapes and I told them, "Do you know what this is?" And they say, "Yeah, it's a tape." So it wasn't a big deal for them. But no, I don't think at least now he's 10. He doesn't realize that sometimes people stop me on the street or I have to talk with them. But fortunately, it's not a big deal, yeah. It's just daddy as usual, yeah.
But it's great, both in the sense that it doesn't affect your life too much, but also in the sense that your family has been able to develop an interest in music, even if it's different music all around. Before we conclude, the first album that really hooked me to Moonspell was 1755. I was curious as to what attracted you to take The Earthquake as a source for your music.
I think it was a story too good not to be told. And I was, when I did my research here in Portugal, I was afraid that a lot of bands have picked it up. Not metal bands, but some kind of other bands or some kind of artists. And even though there's a lot of literature about it, there was not enough art about it, at least not modern or just contemporary to the end of the 18th century. Nowadays, I think that's curious that I have seen much more stuff about the earthquake. Also, after our album was out, it was an album that was highly popular in Portugal. The show was very theatrical. And obviously, like any other Portuguese metalhead or metalhead without a flag, we could combine 3 things where I think Moonspell is very good at. It's history, metal, and atmosphere. And I think 1755 is definitely one of our top albums when it comes to tell a story, because even though it's in Portuguese, it's very tragic, very dramatic, and it really conveys to the story. I mean, I learned this story since I'm a child, of course, because it's a big thing in Portugal, because actually it changed the face of Europe and in several concerns and several matters, actually. But I studied it when I was in high school, more to the perspective of how the new Lisbon was built, because everything was built practically anew, because a lot of stuff was destroyed. And when I studied philosophy at the university, we also had a part of our branches that was speaking about the intention of God. It's called theodicy, the plan of God. And one of the biggest like symbols for the plan of God, if God is good, if he controls nature or not, was the earthquake of 1755. So I was totally fascinated about the theme, and it went really well. And also it opened a window for us to, in the near future, to record another album about another event or history line from Portugal. And this year, in the past few weeks, I had a lot of encounters with earthquakes. Not that the earth was shaking in Lisbon, because it wasn't. It was in Mexico yesterday, so I keep track. But I've been in the new earthquake museum here in Lisbon called Quake, which is very well done, and you can experience just a bit what was to be in Lisbon that time, but more as a visitor. I also did two interviews, one for the History Channel that is coming out in October about the earthquake, and the other one to a more academic thing, because there was a big character we called the Marquis of Pombal that was like the prime minister and the leader, and a lot of universities from Lisbon and Brazil, they are putting together his complete work. It's 132 volumes of writing. He wrote down everything, and I was one of the guests also in that more academic documentary. So yeah, it's very present these days. And when you go to the Earthquake Museum in Lisbon, if you get a chance to visit it, you see the last earthquake. There was like 6.9, I think, 7 in Lisbon, starting in the Algarve, which was in 1969. And then you have exclamation mark, because a new earthquake will come to Portugal sooner or later because of our geographical position.
Okay, so in the issue of theodicy, since you mentioned that you studied philosophy, and I'm quite interested in that, how do you, well, how from a theoretical perspective do you deal with something as that earthquake, as COVID, etc.? How does God allow for the existence of that tragedy, or do you believe that we are godless?
I don't believe. I mean, it's a hard question, but my school of thought, it's much more Voltaire and Ludwig Feuerbach. I believe there is no God but man, and whatever we say, whatever we do, evil or good, it's based on human actions. So, I mean, I came a long way with religion. I was raised a Catholic, then I rebelled. And then when I went to study philosophy, I had a different perspective of things. And I could get rid of all the folklore about God and the devil and appreciate it as one of the most complex, the idea of God, the most complex and troublesome ideas ever put on practice by man. So I think that when it comes to evil itself, of course, that there was a big struggle in the 18th century between the Catholic Church, which was very powerful in Portugal. Remember, we still had Inquisition back then. In the end of the 18th century, was us, Italy, and Spain. And the earthquake brought a lot of destruction to Lisbon, but in the end, among all the rubble, people disconnected a bit from the idea of God as a big father, big daddy, that everything is going to be all right because we have God as providence to protect us. And even though there was different schools of thought, there was this French philosopher, Voltaire, who wrote about it and in a poem. And this poem was very spread out, and it was like a bestseller in Europe back then. and his news travel fast. So all the lay constitutions that we have in Portugal, Spain, France, that sometimes doesn't work, but it was born there with the Lisbon earthquake. The doubt that God is an entity besides us, and that is someone with strings, like a master of puppets, just playing with our lives. So the way I deal with it, I go to science, and never to religious reasons. Religion is something else. It's something of solace. It's a bit like music. People need it. People need to pray. People need to believe something. Some people believe God. Some other people believe Allah. Some other people believe Buddha. So it's a kind of spiritual need we have to fulfill. And then when it comes to the politics of it, then it's when things start getting really out of control. Not because God is evil on itself, but because men definitely we're not the best in the world. So we kind of use this in our advantage to pressure for advantage.
Precisely. I mean, we all, throughout history, every despot and every tyrant has basically said, "Guess what? I actually know what God has to say, and I am here to interpret it." And I think that I agree with you completely on this idea of a godless, real society. The Epicurean idea of if God is willing to prevent evil but is not able, then he is not omnipotent. If he is able but not willing, that he is malevolent. If he is both able and willing, then where is evil? And if he's neither willing nor able, then why call him God? And I think that we find ourselves often in that situation of trying to call God for things that don't really meet the mark of what those of us who were raised in Catholic background, myself, Catholic background, yourself, it's simply not up for the standard that we were sold. And to conclude this very fascinating interview, and for which I apologize that I have taken you outside of just the musical aspect of it, this new album that you're going to release, because from 1755 we go to Hermitage, an album that has been critically acclaimed widely in Europe. American charts are a bit of a pain in the ass, but in Europe it has done very well. And now we will have a live version in quite a special venue. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's one of the 7 natural wonders in Portugal, as you mentioned. And it's something that really belongs to the imaginarium of people right here in Portugal, because it's the biggest biggest natural caves in Portugal. They founded the first galleries around a little bit after the Second World War, where there was a need of curiosity as well, and for people to discover stuff so they could, also in a way deal with the horrors of what the world has just been into. So I was there often when I was a kid in school trips, but I didn't had the culture, let's say, to connect the dots. So I went there during the COVID times with my kid and my niece. The kids needed to be entertained, so I said, well, let's just see a cave then. We've been, through all the PlayStation games, through all the movies, through all the books, through all the walk in the park. So let's do something else. And when I arrived there to the middle plateau of the caves, I felt like I was getting into the cover of Into the Pandemonium by Celtic Frost, which is originally painted by Hieronymus Bosch. The way the geological art, the way the caves were lit, as well, it was really, out of the world, actually inside the world, to be more accurate. So I did the rest of the visits. So I went to speak with the administration and I asked them. They were very kind. The son of the administrator was even a Moonspell fan, so that helped a lot, and a metal fan. We are everywhere, and that's good. It's a community. And I told them, well, can we make a photo shoot here, or can we, and they say, yeah, no problem. So we made the photo shoot. We made a video clip of Common Prayers. But I think my end game was definitely to make a show for Hermitage. And why? Because a lot of these songs from this album are not going to be played live so often, let's put it this way, because right now we are also celebrating 30 years as a band, and we have a long repertoire and some legacy. So definitely to promote a new album when you are 30 years, it's something that makes you think. So I said, well, we just go deep down and records the album in this amazing venue that definitely has a lot to do with the context of the album, because most hermits, not most, but a lot of them live on the caves, and caves is a symbol for solitude, for going alone with yourself. So it was quite, hard sometimes to imagine. And when I said that to my band and my crew, said like, well, he's the crazy dude again, with this. Now we go deep down the earth. We have gone to other places. There was other crazy ideas like the album about the earthquake, etc. But they were quite intrigued, and then we made it like a secret show. Very few people went there. Around like maximum 100 people there, and like 60 were fans. We did all the production, we did everything. It was a silent event, so people had to wear headphones, which was very cool for them because they could have a very pristine sound also in the experience. And then the next stage was to put all the pieces together. So when I got the first cut from the director, it was good, but not good enough. So I watched it like 100 times, almost frame by frame. And I told them, well, the caves have to be a protagonist as well. So there's the band, the crowd, but there's also a lot of landscape views from the caves, all the textures. There's a lot of post-production effects because I really wanted to make it more like a musical film than really just a live DVD. With all due respect, we will play shows like this as well, like with the pyros and the big crowds, etc. But right now we wanted to do something very different and to do
But
also with the
it's like what happens when you wanna get your photo taken on holidays and no, don't put it close to me. I want you to show where I am.
yeah. The caves for me are much of a part of the show than the band, really. So I had the director, okay, go there and just film a lot of texture and just put it in between the songs instead of me drinking water or thanking the crowd, which is something you have to do, but it's not interesting for people. It's just a thing of the moment. So I think the final cut really came how we wanted to, and also all these glitches and all these crazy like changes and sudden changes that people sometimes think something is wrong with the DVD. No, it's like the inspirations here were much more stuff like The Wall from Pink Floyd or The Song Remains the Same from Led Zeppelin. It's totally different, but that was the inspiration to make like a movie, and a movie also has special effects. Yeah.
To close that down, we started this conversation about this new album by mentioning Celtic Frost's use of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. We talk about theosophy. We talk about art. Do you think that there is still a certain perception that heavy metal, hard metal, dark metal, death metal, however you want to call it, is a less cultured form of music?
But heavy metal is a community, so some people even call it as a tribe, but it's a very big tribe, and there's also people that in the heavy metal scene that don't know who's Hieronymus Bosch. But, in a way, and I think heavy metal nowadays has settled also into some more main subjects like fantasy or Vikings or war on itself. There's many bands singing about that, and they're very highly popular. But I always seen heavy metal also as a bit on an intellectual, artistic level. Not only have I learned who the hell was Hieronymus Bosch by Celtic Frost using it, or Giger, but also I learned who Baudelaire was because they have Tristesse de la Lune in the same album, which is a poem from Baudelaire. So I always cultivated the learning side of heavy metal, and some people are very surprised, to learn that metal fans, most or at least a good percentage, is well read and they have interests. But there's really nothing we can do or fight against it than to be ourselves and to continue to improve and to continue to work in our community and also to continue to do stuff. Because when I set up to write an album, of course I can go the easy way and write an album, but about, I don't know, not Vikings is not really my subject, or they were not very popular here in Portugal. Let's call it this way. I think they've been here, like they've been everywhere, you know. But for instance, when I did the Earthquake album, some questions were raised like, will people understand it? And the way I answered to it, it's like, so I have to be afraid of people not understanding things. I think that's minimizing both the subject and the receiver, if you know what I mean. So I have to settle down. And sometimes heavy metal, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of people that are drunk in festivals and say, oh, you should write more songs about opium, etc. And I said, already did it, you know, already did it. And I can do it 3-4 more times, but, you know, it won't be the same. And there's not a lot to write about opium. Just that song, I think it kind of sums it up. So, yeah, but I keep myself this utopia or dream that in heavy metal, I found a lot of stuff, and I found some intellectual experiences as well. Yeah.
Fernando, thank you so much for all of
No
the
problem.
time
No problem.
that you gave me today, and I look forward to seeing you again on tour very soon, man.
All right. See you there. Bye-bye. Cheers.